These days, most games are made to be easy and breezy, so players can finish them and get their money's worth. But this wasn't always the case. Old arcade games were incredibly difficult to ensure players would keep parting with their coins. So when home consoles arrived on the scene, it took game developers time before they realized games didn't have to be nearly impossible. Here are some retro video game levels kids today would surely give up on. Before we dive in though, please give us a big thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Let's get started. Number 10. Bart vs. the Space Mutants. From shirts to lunchboxes, The Simpsons was a cultural phenomenon in the early 90s. The first Simpsons video game was Bart vs. the Space Mutants, a game that was equal parts challenging and confusing. It was never quite clear what you were supposed to be doing at any given time, but as you tried to figure it out, there was a good chance the game would kill you long before you cracked the case. Let's look at the first stage of the game, because it's the only one that many players ever saw. You play as Bart in a surprisingly dangerous version of Springfield. Aliens have landed and they're trying to gather every purple object so they can somehow create a device that'll destroy the planet. Your job is to make all the purple objects turn some other color. It's a strange goal for a game, but it's a promising one if it's done well. Spoilers, it's not done well here. The controls are abysmal, which makes avoiding enemies nearly impossible. Making matters worse, there's never any indication of which platforms you could jump on, so you'll waste a lot of time jumping and falling as you try to reach all those precious purple objects. Number 9. Ghosts and Goblins. Ghosts and Goblins is one of the most infuriating games ever made, beginning with the very first level. For starters, your character is so weak he can barely live through a paper cut. Enemies are everywhere, moving in unpredictable patterns like tornadoes of frustration. Naturally, the controls are stiff as a board, so you'll hardly feel like the hero you're meant to be. And when you take damage, you lose your suit of armor, leaving you in nothing but your skivvies. If you can make it past the first level of the game, you're basically a gaming god. Even if you put in the hours and somehow beat the game, you'd probably expect a grand reward, right? I have some bad news for you. When you beat Ghosts and Goblins, you're greeted with a badly translated screen telling you the ending is a trap from Satan. You're then dropped back at the very beginning of stage 1. Most people would throw in the towel at this point, but if you somehow beat the entire game a second time, you'll finally get the real ending. Another badly translated screen reading, "Congratulations, this story is happy end. Thank you." Talk about a letdown. Number 8. Mega Man 2. Every Mega Man 2 level offers a heap of challenge, especially if you don't play them in the correct order. You see, beating a Mega Man boss means you get his weapon, and every other boss is susceptible to one of the other boss's weapons. Play the stages in the wrong order, and you won't have the weapon these tough bosses are weak against, which means you're probably gonna die. Most kids these days would give up on the first level in Mega Man 2, or Quick Man stage. A huge reason are the giant lasers, which fill and cross the screen and kill you in one hit. Memorization is the name of the game here, which means you're gonna have to die a lot in this level before you'll remember where you need to go to avoid being fried like a chicken leg. In a brief part of the level when you're not being pelted by radiation death, the lights go out. This leaves you in darkness to walk and jump over unseen terrain. And if you face Quickman without Flashman's time-stopping weapon, you're almost certainly gonna die as he jumps all over the place, pelting you with his boomerangs. This level just isn't fair. Number 7. Battletoads. In the early 90s, the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles had basically taken over the planet with cartoons, movies, comics, and action figures everywhere you looked. As we all know, whenever a franchise starts raking in the cash, the copycats won't be far behind. Battletoads was basically an attempt by developer Rare to piggyback on the success of the Ninja Turtles. And it worked. Battletoads looks and plays great, with satisfying combat and standout graphics at the time. The only problem is the game's difficulty. It starts out fairly normal, but by level 3, the challenge cranks up to 11. Level 3 puts you in a speeder bike and has you dodge walls and leap over barriers and pits. This section starts out at a reasonable pace and then ramps up quick. Long walls and barriers fly at you with lightning speed and push your reflexes to the breaking point. Then, it speeds up even more and only the most dedicated or plain lucky players will succeed. And if you manage to make it past this nearly impossible level, well, you'll soon find out it gets even harder from there. Don't even get me started on the rat race or the swimming level. It's all too much. Number 6. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. We mentioned earlier that the Ninja Turtles were one of the most popular franchises in the world back in the 80s and 90s. So it's only natural they had a game of their own, which was released on the NES in 1989. It too was a devilishly challenging game. It was seemingly made to test whether kids loved Michelangelo and company enough to make it through the gauntlet. The first things you'll notice about the game is that the controls just feel wrong. The attacks are slow and the jumping is an abomination. The levels are also scattered around a needlessly overcomplicated world. It's very confusing. But the part where you'll almost certainly grind your teeth out of sheer frustration is the underwater level that has you swimming around to dismantle bombs set for unknown reasons by the Foot Clan. Once again, the controls for swimming feel about as smooth as a gravel road. Throw in a bunch of evil seaweed, shoddy wiring, a tight time limit, endless dead ends, and you're in for a truly painful experience. The 4 green heroes deserve better than this. Number 5. Metroid. The Metroid series has produced some of the best video games of all time, with killer titles like Super Metroid and the Metroid Prime trilogy coming out over the years. Probably because of those excellent games, many fans remember the original Metroid fondly. But if you go back and play it today, you'll discover it might not hold up as well as you remember. Not only is this 1985 NES game tough from the outset, but it's also incredibly repetitive, with environments that look more or less the same and seem to go on forever without end. Starting in an area called Brinstar, you make your way down dreadfully monotonous corridors stuffed with enemies that seem happy to absorb your bullets as they bash into you, draining your health. If you don't use a guide, you're definitely going to get lost in Brinstar. The biggest surprise Metroid had in store for fans was underneath all the armor, because the main character was a woman. This would make players bat an eye today, so even that revelation doesn't pull Metroid above its woefully challenging, yet somehow boring level design. Metroid may have been something special when it first came out, but it's way too hard and dull for kids today. Number 4. Contra. You know the classic Konami cheat code, right? Up, up, down, down, left, right, BA, start. Of course you do. And there's a very good reason you know it. You know it because Contra is nearly impossible without it. With that cheat code, which gives you 30 lives instead of 3, Contra is one of the best action games ever made. Without it, it's a hair-pulling grind. Bullets come flying at you from all angles in this game. Many of those bullets are just a few pixels in size, which makes them incredibly hard to see. But if a single bullet happens to touch your character, he's a goner. Ditto if an enemy even brushes your shoulder as it passes by. Unless you grab a rare invincibility power-up, there's no way in Contra to sustain a hit without dying instantly. And when you only have 3 lives to play with, it's a war zone out there. So let's say the hardest level in Contra is the first level, because it's the only level you're likely to see if you play this game with only 3 lives. Only the lucky or the extremely skilled will make it to level 2. Number 3. Castlevania. If Contra was one of the NES's breakout shooters, Castlevania was its premier action horror game. This fright fest puts you in the boots of Simon Belmont, one of a long line of vampire hunters. Your prey is Dracula himself, who waits in a tower atop his perfectly gothic castle. Along the way, you have to fight through bats, ghouls, swamp creatures, and even Frankenstein's monster, using an array of thematically appropriate weaponry. It's a classic game for a reason, but kids today probably wouldn't get very far without cheating. Castlevania has teeth, and it's not afraid to bite. All of the levels offer giant-sized challenges, but things really start to get dire once you enter the castle and reach stage 13. This begins a series of levels that are capped off with a battle against Death himself. The standard enemies do tons of damage, but Death is the real threat. This villain soars around the room, sending magic sickles at you from all directions. If you were a more nimble hero, this might not be so tough, but Simon Belmont moves with the grace of a swamp creature. There's no finesse, just blocky movements that all but prevent you from dodging the incoming projectiles. Pro tip, try using holy water on him. Number 2. Punch-Out! It may look like a boxing game, but in a funny way, Punch-Out is more about solving puzzles. Each oversized opponent you face is programmed to act out a series of patterns. Every punch, every dodge, every block, these are all predetermined actions in the game's code. If you fight an opponent enough times, you'll learn the patterns and find vulnerabilities. The difference between Punch-Out and most puzzle games is that acting on these patterns often requires split-second timing. Wait too long to throw a punch as Bald Bull charges at you, and you'll find yourself flat on your back staring up the rafters. Making matters worse, as you progress through the fighters, these patterns become tougher to predict and their vulnerabilities harder to exploit. This culminates in the fight against Mike Tyson, or Mr. Dream, depending on which version of the game you're playing. Fighting Tyson in the game is much like fighting Tyson in his prime, nearly impossible to beat. He can easily lay you out with a single hit. The only way you know a blow is coming is because he signals it a nanosecond before he strikes. Hesitate for even a moment, and you're toast. Number 1. Ninja Gaiden. Unlike many of the games on this list, Ninja Gaiden has fantastic controls. Your character is fast and responsive when you want to jump, slash with your sword, or toss a throwing star at an attacker. If only there weren't so many enemies. And if only those enemies didn't tend to appear at the worst possible moment, like when you're jumping over a pit. This game is tough as nails, but the challenge really escalates towards the end. Stage 6 is full of frustrations no one should ever have to endure. But the final boss of Stage 6 is the real killer. His first form is easy enough to defeat, but a cutscene informs you that you're not out of the woods yet. Form 2 is much more challenging. As you dodge the many fireballs he throws at you, you're lucky if you can get a hit in edgewise. Take this one down and you have one more form to face, the most difficult one yet. Most people who play Ninja Gaiden give up long before they reach this part. They might be the lucky ones. The worst part? There's no cheat code to help you out. Unless you have a Game Genie on hand, you're on your own. Well, we hope you enjoyed our list of retro levels kids today would give up on. If we missed one, please let us know in the comments. Be sure to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of our great video content in the future. Thanks for watching!